Hey everyone, it's LaShonda from Labors of Love here with another Therapy Thursday. So today I want to talk about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome refers to an experience that a person may have when they feel inadequate, not good enough, or like they have in some ways like tricked the system to get where they are. So I have this job, but I don't really feel adequate enough to do the job, or like feel like I'm good enough to have the job, but I'm here. So along with it comes this idea that somehow people have an expectation of us that we really can't fulfill or uphold. And this might not be rooted in any defining, like we might not have any data to confirm it, I guess is what I'm saying. But it is an internal experience that sometimes evokes things like shame, or guilt or inadequacy. What's the other word that I was thinking of? Incompetence, right? So that's imposter syndrome. And a lot of people I have talked about imposter syndrome. Whenever I see people addressing imposter syndrome, it's under this idea that that experience is a personal deficit of the person who's feeling it. And there are messages around empowerment, like just, trust in your inherent worth and value. You deserve to be where you are. You worked hard to get where you are. You are not less than anyone. I am so for those messages of empowerment. However, when talking about imposter syndrome, when we do not look at the systems that have created the cultures that perpetuate those ideas, then I think we are doing a disservice to the topic. So while yes, we can say that a person can shift their mindset and do their own personal work to show up as their full authentic selves in these spaces, we also need to be looking at what is happening to perpetuate these narratives that people who do not show up in a certain way are less worthy. And here are some examples of how that's shown up in my life, because what we're calling imposter syndrome, I've experienced it many times. So there have been times where I've gotten a job and I interviewed for the job, and the people who hired me got a really good sense of who I was. But then sometime between getting the job and starting the job, there was this fear that like somehow I had manipulated them or convinced them that I was better at this job than I actually was, and that they had hired me in error. And once I started the job, they would figure it out and be disappointed. That's a real thing. So then I have to ask, what are the things that are explicitly being said in interviews and during the hiring process that actually let people know that their full authentic selves are welcomed and encouraged to show up in that space? So again, I can do work around realizing I have these limiting beliefs and do my personal work around it, but there's also a responsibility in the culture that I'm moving into to recognize that as a Black woman, there have been constant narratives that have been explicit in telling me and my ancestors that we do not belong in certain places. And so when we start talking about organizations wanting to be more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive, we need to start looking at how they're being explicit in helping people understand that people are welcome to come in their full selves. What I think is also important is how we, people who experience imposter syndrome, perpetuate it with other people. What I mean by that is sometimes the way that we move through imposter syndrome and feel more connected to the place is through assimilation, is through shape shifting. It's through looking the part and sounding the part of wherever we are so that we can feel like we fit in better. When we do that and someone else shows up in their full selves and they haven't conformed in that way, let's be honest that sometimes we look at them and we judge them. Sometimes that's to them. We're saying things like, oh, you might want to rethink what you're wearing, or how you have your hair, or how you're talking, or it's the judgment that we have in our minds that they're being to themselves or to counter whatever the environment is. We can perpetuate the culture of imposter syndrome, even as those who experience it on a sometimes regular basis. And finally, I think it's important that as we're talking about imposter syndrome, we recognize that it's not this personal deficit that people are just making it up in their minds. Those who do not fit the dominant narratives of our culture, which in America is white, male, middle class, Christian, thin bodied, all of these different things that create the template of what the myth that is white supremacy has labeled right, good, normal. Anyone who falls outside of those things have been getting messages before we've even been born of what is good and what is not. And so I really just want to encourage us to stop treating what we're calling imposter syndrome as something that the individuals have to shoulder all the responsibility to navigate through, and that we recognize that systems and cultures have been intentionally put in place to perpetuate imposter syndrome, and that we don't just address the individual, but we address the systems. So that's all I got for you. How are you perpetuating it? And how are you willing to stop doing that? That's what I'm going to be thinking about this week. And I encourage you to do the same. If you would like to get in contact with me, if you have suggestions for content, please reach me at www.thelaborsoflove.com. Don't forget, we're on all the major social media outlets. Y'all, I got a Patreon. If you are benefiting from these messages, please head over to Patreon and provide some financial support in that way. Other ways is to share the podcast with your loved ones and your friends. Go ahead and give us that 5-star rating. Write a review if you can. Until we connect again, you all be well.